All right, great. Thanks to everyone for joining us again. I'm sitting here with Kevin Smith, Vice President of Revenue Operations. We've heard quite a bit from Sean, from Sherrod, from Jordan, as well as myself on some of the things that are going on in the world today, especially around AI. And now we're going to switch it up a little bit and start establishing a perspective that executives really want to hear from us when we're thinking about how we want to deploy different elements of AI in operations across our go-to-market teams. So, Kevin, why don't you introduce yourself and take it away?
Thanks, Vic. Yeah, really excited to join today and talk to this topic. It's obviously top of mind for, I think, everybody around what's happening in AI. Are you using AI? What's going on? So happy to share my perspective from my time in the C-suite as well as in the board meetings. So I've run revenue operations as well as just sat in the CRO's office for close to 7 years now. I've done it big companies like McAfee and some smaller companies as well. So happy to share kind of the genesis of how we've gone from just using kind of basic reporting to Salesforce to Clary and similar tools around this increasing infiltration of AI in the workplace, especially like on the revenue side.
So, with all that experience, when somebody like me, let's just pick on me a little bit, a little self-deprecation. So, I'm a global sales development leader and somewhat growth hacker, and I've got this wild idea. And I know, or I think I know, I want to help the business run faster. So, I slap together a bunch of stuff with bubblegum and tape in my presentation. And I run off to your office and I do that thing like, hey, Kevin, you got 15 minutes? And then I just dump my ideas all over your desk. So is that the right way I should be doing it? Or is there another way that we can get this going? I think that that's a common question people have.
Yeah, I feel like you're leading the witness with the build up there. So I would, politely recommend a slightly different approach. Like I love the gumption of like, let's try some things. Let's tape it together. Let's not invest a ton of effort perfecting it until we know whether there's an appetite for it or whether it works. So I always love when teams come to me and they say, hey, I've got this thesis. I started working on it. Here's my perspective. Here's what I expect to see, and then here's what I've done. Can I get your advice on kind of next steps? And am I thinking about things the right way? Because there's always tons of side conversations happening, and they're not nefarious. They're just side conversations that are happening that not everyone's aware of. There's also just lots of kind of forward-looking plans that everyone that's on this call might not be aware of. So like right now, my team and I are working on a 5-year plan that I'm not necessarily rolling out to my individual contributors because like they're focused day to day. The next level up is focused like month to month. And then I feel like I need to focus 6 months to a year out. So as you've got ideas and as you've got perspective on things you can do differently, it's great to kind of lever it up. So you're thinking, hey, is this still going to be applicable in a couple months? Or is there ways that I can take this and modify it such that it can survive whatever changes we're looking at over those times? So kind of first off, definitely bring those perspectives in, ask for help early and often. But I think the really important thing is making sure like you have the data behind you, and then you've also got like an outcome that you're driving to. So executives generally tend to think in like really small windows of expertise and can't really go from like really down to really big. And so when you're like, hey, I've got this idea, this is a problem and it just doesn't feel right, so I'm trying to go after this thing, like that's really broad. And executives, you may remember, like they get burned sometimes giving what they think is just advice that people interpret as like direction, and then they go scurry off and work really hard on something that was really just like a brainstorm. So I
Yeah.
think the other important thing is to really ask that clarification of like, hey, I'm working on this thing. This is my thesis. This is what I'm working on. Do you think that that's helpful? And what kind of specific pieces would you ask me to work on so that I can like figure those things out and then bring them back to you or bring them back to somebody else that we can work on?
That brings up a great point. So what should we be working on in what frame of time? That's one paradigm. And then I'd imagine that somebody like you that's been chief of staff several times as well, you've probably seen a lot of different competing objectives and initiatives. So, how do you bring that all together so that everyone's looking at the same thing? And then, layer one more part on that, which is how would we apply artificial intelligence to that?
Yeah, so I really think so. I'll start with the AI piece because I think that's
Okay,
one part, and then we'll talk about that. So
I
the
like
thing
that.
that I think a ton about in this scenario is that AI will allow you to run just tons of simulations and provide tons of just scenarios that you can pressure test your ideas, your thesis against. And while I don't necessarily recommend sharing all of that dirty work with an executive that you're talking to, it should give you the confidence when you bring something to them to be like, hey, I've evaluated this from a bunch of different scenarios. Like I don't know how true all of this is, but I listen to tons of podcasts that talk about AI, and it's like the promise is, you can run 2 years worth of data in an afternoon that AI is going to generate and keep pressure testing. So you can say, okay, well, what if we have 10% growth? What if we have 5% decline? And you can generate all those scenarios really quickly, really simply, and you can see how your proposal plays out in a bunch of those different scenarios. And because that's ultimately like where, regardless of, I think, the timeline you're asking, like what I think an executive will likely do is ask you some of those pressure testing questions. Say, like, okay, so you've got a thesis that we need to make this change. Does your thesis change? Does your outcome change if we have a black swan event, or do we have a white swan or a blue wave, whatever you want to call it, like massive change?
Right.
How does that impact what you're thinking about? And you can say, well, like I modeled it out this way, I modeled it out that way, or like I've been thinking about it in these sort of other ways. So I think the question around the timeline, I think, is a lot of company specific. If you're McAfee, one of my previous employers, and you're a multi-billion-dollar company that's owned by private equity, you're looking like a couple of years out. If you're in a startup world that is worried about your next round of funding, your timeline is a lot smaller. So it might be great that you've got a thesis that you can change how we report, revenue a year from now. Like the company might not exist. So I can't provide a ton of advice specific on that one. What I really think is like put yourself in the shoes of your executive, try where you can to leverage your goals that the companies announce, whether they're quarterly, annual, biannual, whatever it is, kind of think that your executive is trying to hit those, and then your proposal should kind of match along those, what's feasible to do during that time, and then use the AI to start to model those things out. We might be going down a crazy area here, but like something that I'm really fascinated with now is a colleague of mine told me they were using ChatGPT to prepare for interviews. And they were using the voice function on their app to just say, like, hey, ask me a bunch of questions. They answer the questions and they got feedback on it. So do something like that. Like, do at the best attempt that you can, build a model of what you think your executive is into. Feed it a bunch of information. Hey, they used to work at big companies. They do this. I think their top three priorities are these, and then model out a scenario where you're in the office and you're asking them, hey, I want your feedback on this idea, and just start saying it out loud. I think you'll get a lot of bandwidth like with that. And hopefully, if you've trained your model well, or at least your example well, you'll get some pointed feedback from executives around like, I think you can do this differently, or like start to prepare for some of those questions. Um,
Okay. So one part of that then would be let's just take pipeline because that seems to be on top of mind right now. I mean, like I was talking about earlier, I mean, win rates are down, the cost of doing business is up because of all the different inflationary pressures. Um, you know, uh, we've spent all this time innovating all these thousands of permutable best of breed solutions, and they're still not helping us. Um, so we got all of these things going on that are working against us, and we're still trying to generate pipeline.
Yep.
And then I've got to compete with everybody, not compete, but I got to collaboratively compete with everybody in that room. So if I come in with my dashboard and my AI tests, they may not exactly align with what you just said. So how do I fit in there, and how do I make appropriate recommendations for, I don't know, we could pick any of these: strategy, process, technology, uh, what the new North Star should be, right? We can pick any of those things, and automatically I'm kind of in a dogfight with everybody. So I think one of the things that you said one time when I met with you is that there is no such thing as one dashboard to rule them all. So, how do I compete? Somebody's going to pull up that slide and say, "Oh, Vic's numbers don't look like mine." So what do I? As the executive, and again, I'm putting you in the hot seat. What do you recommend us for all of us to do?
Yeah, so I think, let's start with what your last point there, which is like there's always going to be competing perspectives on the data. And so, right, you've got the dashboard in there, and if the dashboard is not just up and to the right, who's ever, so if it's flat or if it's down, who's ever responsible for that is going to question your data, is going to question your perspective and just say, I see things differently than that. So one is like just prepare yourself before you walk into that sort of room. If you've got that kind of chart, that you kind of know where the data is coming from, how the model's built, why it's saying what it is, and you're confident that you can recreate those. And this is where I'll take like kind of the negative side around AI. It's like that's the risk, is that if you use a tool that has AI built into it and it's spitting out outcomes, I want to caution everyone in this room to make sure you understand how that came to be, what data went into that, and where it's coming from. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying it's helpful in the context of a broader conversation.
But it says AI
So,
on the side of the solution.
right.
No,
And I was asked to use AI because the
right? It's
board
like
asked the
Diet
boss.
Coke. No, I'm kidding. Go ahead.
So I think that's the biggest,
Yeah.
pitfall in an executive room, because executives got there by asking a lot of really smart questions.
Mhm.
They got there by knowing where the hot buttons are and avoiding them, or pushing them in the right way. And so, if you're kind of in the analyst seat, or if you're in the person that's running these tools and you're asked to come in to present, I think have confidence in where you're getting your data from, where there are projections being made, and how those projections are kind of articulating themselves on that slide, and then feel confident answering kind of the questions that you know about. So say, hey, based on the model and the inputs that we've put in, and we, in a previous life, did something similar to this, kind of before really AI was as good as it is now. But we took historical data, built a model that said, hey, let's have predictive pipeline. So not all pipeline is the same. It depends on industry, it depends on contract size, depends on customer base. And we built what we felt was like predictive pipeline, so that we said, hey, in the Asia Pacific region, your daily pipeline generation needs to be different than US commercial, different than European enterprise. And our executives were like, wait a minute, no, I don't like that, because you're telling me I got to do something different. And I believe
Mhm.
that my close numbers are this. And so we had, look, I'm not saying this is the perfect number. I'm saying it's directionally accurate. And what I want to do is get your buy-in that we're going to track this. And you have my commitment that I'm going to be honest and direct with what the data is and what I'm using. I'm also going to be honest with, like, I think that in 6 weeks, we're going to see this number. Now, you may
Right.
have a different perspective. Let's agree to let this play out, track it, and then we'll circle back on it. And I think you can get a lot of commitment from folks to say, I'm not saying this is 100% right. I'm saying I have confidence in this for these reasons, and I've done my homework, and I'm asking you to commit for a week, a month, 6 months, whatever it is, to see where this outcome is, and then we'll see who was more accurate, and then we'll start to modify it. And hopefully that gets you a seat at the table. It gets you the confidence in the group that, like, oh, you've done your homework. You're not just taking the blind outcome from a tool. You're using that to try to be smarter and try to make us all smarter. Let's give you the grace to go after this, and then the onus is on you to just own it at that point, and constantly kind of keep them up to speed on what's happening.
Amazing. Okay, that's great. So then, if you were to take a half step back, and I know you're kind of going through this right now a little bit, what are some of the I call them food groups? So I guess it's just because I'm an old guy, but what are the basics? I know Jordan talked a little bit about this, but what are some of the basic non-negotiables for, let's just say, um, senior executives and the dependents in the boardroom? If you were going to put this together, like, and make it somewhat amendable, what would you be looking for in your go-to-market business? in terms of either solution, process, or hierarchy?
Yeah. So, I think it's a tough question, right? Because
Hmm.
I think a lot of it depends, unfortunately, on the personalities. And Vic, you and I have talked about this
Oh
offline, but it's
yeah,
like, right, people are the cause of and the solutions to all of our problems at work. Um, so taking some liberty there with the famous quote,
of
but
course.
I think one thing that's like sticking in my mind in particular is I'm learning a new leadership team is like there's one person that I've been told like don't come to them unless you can recreate the data in the dashboard or in Salesforce. And so like that's a non-negotiable for me now. If I see something and I have a concern or I think there's an opportunity to do something different, I know before I approach their office that I have to like practice going in and recreating that information. Because like just like when you go to IT and you're like, hey, my camera's not working, and then you show it to them and it works. And you're like, I didn't do anything different. What happened? It's just like someone else's eyes on you just change the gremlins in your machine. So one thing, practice, know what you need to demonstrate, and then practice it in a bunch of different scenarios so you feel confident like you can recreate what you're trying to show them.
Right.
The second piece is listen. So I'm taking like food groups in terms of like as a person
Yep.
presenting to executives, right? Big thing is just listen. Like executives are going to talk, executives need to expound their feelings, and they know that they only kind of have one shot at a lot of these times to give feedback. So say what you're going to say and then stop and write down and listen like what they're telling you to do. So I think that too many people miss that and they're like, I prepared so hard, I have all this perspective, I got to get it out. And oftentimes executives can see 4 steps ahead of you. They know what you're going to say. They want to cut you off and they want to say their piece. Let them do that. You'll walk away with them thinking you're a lot smarter than maybe you are, not judging anybody on here. Um, and then the last piece, I think is like similarly like follow up high, we call like at a high say do ratio. So if they give you an assignment, agree on a timeline and get back to them on it. If you say you're going to provide additional data because you ran into something or they want a different perspective on it, get back to them on that, build that trust, play the long game, and you'll be able to like kind of build that rapport with the executives that are there. So I think a lot of it's really good hygiene, like know your audience, be able to recreate what you're going to do, listen when they give you feedback, and then follow up on it. And I think if you
Right.
do those things, like then I'm taking as a given that if you're attending this conference, you're going to work really hard, you're going to have good perspective, you're going to use your data and your tools to inform your decisions. So now, how is your presence in that room look, and how do you interact with the human beings that you have to kind of convince and influence?
So if I were to take what you just said and think about it from an applicability, I don't know why that word caught me, perspective, if I'm going to be effective, representative, and valuable to the people you just discussed, I need to use my people and use the intelligence that I have on the floor or across my global team. Then I need to hurry that up using automation and smarter dashboards. Oops, I don't know why that's talking. And then the last part here is going to be something along the lines of speed kills, so slow down, because AI is going to just increase the amount of responses that you're getting, but it also will increase the mistakes that you make if you don't follow a process.
Right.
And the last part would be get get more eyes on the table when you are reaching the end of your conclusion, just to make sure that before I start my scenarios and playing with solutions and making sure that if I pull up my BI solution, the marketing MQLs didn't automatically change and just change the whole curve, joking with marketing, of course. But does that sound about right in terms of
That's
a
yeah.
perspective?
I mean, it's like, like you're building a dashboard, like everyone in the world like wants their stuff in there. But
Mm-hmm.
I think it's like asking all of those questions and saying, what are you trying to solve for and who are you in the organization? Let's just kind of keep you focused in that area. I mean, showing my age, like this old house, like measure twice, cut
Yeah.
once. is
Yeah,
like just keep like asking those things. And I think again with AI, like the scenarios and the modeling can get so far ahead of you that it keeps building on itself. And if you didn't get the inputs right from the beginning, it might
yep,
wildly spin out of control. And I worry about that as we're using that information to make decisions. So I think that that ability, and this is great to say now, but then we're all stressed out and we don't have time and I need it yesterday. But like the more you can really ask the right questions and not just say when an executive says, hey, I want this, let's call it a dashboard. I want this dashboard and I want to have all these KPIs information on it. Like how to have that confidence to say, hey, can we take a step back? What problems are you trying to solve?
hmm,
Let me think through what inputs can give you the answers to help solve those problems. And you might be wildly distracted by all these other dashboard, all these other dials over here, when what you really need are like these three key things. And let's give you those. Let's see if those help you make the right decisions because we can have a different dashboard that has all those outcomes on it. But if you're trying to make decisions, you need different inputs, not outcomes. So yeah, I think that that patience, that pausing, asking a lot of questions up front will set you up for success. Because like once this thing takes off and once it's out there live, it's hard to pull it back. So
absolutely.
little bit of caution at the front, but full well knowing that like someone in my seat might ask you to do it immediately and like not have the patience to give you that.
That's really good that you said all of that because especially the last part, because you're going to get asked to respond quickly. And if you haven't done the legwork and you don't understand why you have this capability that's additive to any of the solutions that you might be using, it could be Gong, it could be Outreach, it could be any number of these solutions that are now executing at that level. You need to know what the differences are in context. You need to know what the accumulation is versus the execution, because accumulation of data versus execution data, those are two different finished products. And if you use the data incorrectly, then all it's going to do is exasperate the conversation you just mentioned. So some data requires human intervention and some does not. Some is meant to be combined with other things, but it's not going to be combined immediately because no matter how we write the information or how we zap it or any other way that you're doing it, you can't. It's somebody needs to be sitting there and understanding that the sort principle is going to require human beings. And it brings me back to an early paper that I don't remember what year it was actually written, but in 2014 or 15, it was 2016, excuse me. I was writing a series of articles for AI and accounting, and I read a really large paper end to end from Stanford University about the importance of understanding when human context is necessary. And the simple principle is if you need to automate things that are dumb, great. If they're easily understood and automated, great. If they're really smart, there should be guardrails and checkpoints on everything you're doing. So for everybody that's been listening, Kevin, imagine if you just let it go. And let's say we're in a Coca-Cola factory and we've just let the machine start to decide better ways of formulating. But maybe the formula for some part of the carbonation or additives starts to look like battery acid to the AI. And now it starts at like half of 1%. It just adds a little bit. But over time, it's like 28% battery acid. And then people start getting sick or dying. I mean, that's just the worst. That'd be the worst example ever. And of course, I don't think Coke would ever do that. So I don't want to put them on the spot. But the generalism here is this, is that even in the best model and the best scenario, if you don't trust verify, it's no different than how you work with human beings today. You're going to be surprised one day, either by the change in the world around you that the AI couldn't adapt to, or the AI's changes because it interpreted things without you being present. So
Right.
you bring up some great points. I could see myself getting burned or others getting burned at an executive meeting. And just getting the gotcha happens, and you're like, oh man.
Yeah,
So
and like I don't expect everybody on this call to be an AI expert. Like that's
no,
not possible. But I think being confident in the, this is what I use, this is how I trained it, or this is how it was trained by the vendor that sent it to us, and these are the different outcomes that we can see as plausible based on that gives you the credibility to say, like I'm confident that this gives us the highest probability for success. And frankly, that's how world economists and whatnot have been acting for decades with this before
yeah,
AI. It's just all this is just happening faster, and we just got to make sure as human beings and as the smart ones in the room, where they're watching it and using it appropriately. And there's super easy ways to use it, coaching yourself, doing scenario planning, those sort of things. And there's super complicated ways that, right, if you let them run unadorned, like they could cause problems in the future. So kind of understand the tools at your disposal, understand the outcomes that they're producing, and then understand the story that you need to tell around them so that you get the credit for the work that's happening behind the scenes and that you're seen as the one that can make that change happen inside the organization.
Fantastic. Well, is there any other parting thoughts that you might have for us today, Kevin?
I mean, just good luck with all of this. Like it's coming at all of us super fast. And have empathy for the folks that are in your organization and that you're reporting to because it's happening with them really fast. They're going to ask a lot of questions. So use the tools, play with them, practice them, but just do so safely and think about that story that you're trying to tell. Because I think we're still human beings, we're still interacting with each other. Storytelling is still a core part of who we are. And I think those folks that can tell the best stories and back that up with tools are the ones that are going to be like the most successful.
Yep. And I think the earlier point of don't lose sight of what the actual objectives are. You didn't say that directly, but it was hidden in the what the executive wants. They see 3 steps away, through walls, around corners. And every time we're doing anything related to reporting up to everybody, we have to stay on top of those objectives. Because if they can't see the North Star in what we're doing, they're absolutely going to say no. And we actually lose credibility, especially when we're bringing uncomfortable tools and uncomfortable processes to the table. Because when everything is new and we've never done it before, it's equals risk. And everybody in a VP plus position has gotten there because they are experts at de-risking every scenario. So we have to be
Very good
less
point.
risky.
Yeah.
We have to be very much less risky.
Yeah.
So thank you, Kevin. All right. Thank you, everyone. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to hear from the founder of Tenbound, David Delaney, who's going to give us our closing remarks and take it away for the rest of the day. Thanks again, Kevin. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, everybody. Bye. Okay.